Het tweede gezicht, Afrikaanse maskers, generale bank, de kracht achter cultuur.
It was in 1963 that I first developed an interest in Wagner, or Wagner, as my speech synthesizer pronounces him. Wagner, more than any other person before or since, had the ability to compose music that has an emotional effect. It reaches a level no one else does.
He must have been an awful, difficult man. Betrayed everything and everybody for his going forward.
I'm a survivor of Auschwitz. I cannot be rational with a person who was the first to preach a separation of races, the first, in fact, who created the notion of a nation of masters which should rule the world. We still have survivors from the death camps, like myself. I'm a survivor of Auschwitz and other camps. Why should in Israel we perform Wagner?
Part of Wagner's fascination is that there are so many people who still feel so incredibly negative and disgusted by him as a musician and as a person, as a personage, and that keeps it alive.
Wagner for me is indispensable. It's an antidote to all this turbulence here in New York. It's sublime music. It's like therapy for me. When my nerves are on end, that's when Wagner comes in to the rescue.
Richard Wagner werd geboren in Leipzig op 22 mei 1813. De stad was in die dagen nog bezet door de troepen van Napoleon. Richard was het negende kind van Johanna en Karl Friedrich Wagner, een politieman. Maar rond zijn geboorte hangt een waas van mysterie. Zijn vader stierf niet lang na zijn doopsel en zijn moeder bracht hem onder bij Ludwig Geyer, een acteur en schilder.
Now the question is whether she was already having an affair with Geyer during the period when Wagner was born, whether he was actually conceived by Geyer or not. Geyer is a Jewish name, which doesn't mean that everybody who is called Geyer is Jewish. The question is whether Wagner thought he was Jewish. And he was himself called Geyer until the age of 15, Richard Geyer. He had to sign himself Richard Geyer in school, which meant a kind of identity change when he changed the name to Wagner. His first musical experience was learning to play a chorus on the piano from Weber's Der Freischütz, and the important thing about that for him was that Geyer taught him how to play it. He learned to compose by getting a book about how to harmonize bass lines. The truth is, though, I think he was taught more than he lets on, because the image he wants to give in his autobiography is of the great genius, like Siegfried, sort of a musical Siegfried, who can do music without necessarily being taught.
There was a man called Müller who he went to and found he couldn't pay. There was a man called Weinlich. It looks as though Weinlich in particular gave him really a pretty good basic grounding in fairly up-to-date techniques of writing symphonies.
Clearly Beethoven was a tremendous influence on Wagner, and Wagner always liked to claim that Beethoven was growing out of the symphony. by writing the ninth, the voices came in, and so of course heading towards the great music dramas of Wagner. It may be that he really felt that, or it may be that he liked to fit Beethoven into his own portrait.
Na een korte periode aan de Universiteit van Leipzig ging Wagner werken als koorleider in kleine operahuizen en componeerde hij Das Liebesverbot en Die Feen, zijn eerste 2 opera's. Die Feen is een navolging van de populaire Duitse componist Karl Maria von Weber. Op zijn 21ste werd hij verliefd op de actrice Mina Planer. Niet lang daarna trouwden ze.
I think in the case of Wagner and Minna, it seems to have been an attraction of opposites. I mean, Wagner was highly emotional and highly articulate and certainly highly ambitious and intellectually curious, and Minna was, well, none of those things. But she was physically attractive and also domesticated and socially accomplished.
It was when he changed and grew and developed that she didn't know how to cope with him, and very much resented the fact that he wouldn't use his evident talent just to earn enough money to pay the bills. He was always in debt and always borrowing money and not paying people back, and she found it all a nightmare. And she had a sort of what would nowadays be called a suburban soul, and he couldn't stand it eventually.
Het was de Duitse opera in Riga, de hoofdstad van Letland, die hem zijn eerste betrekking als dirigent bezorgde.
This is all that's left of the theatre in Riga where Wagner conducted. This is the ballroom. It's still extant. Beneath was the theatre, no longer in existence, but there are plans that still exist for it. Wagner remembered 3 things about the theatre. First, that it was dark. Second, that the stalls were raked upwards like an amphitheatre. And third, that the orchestra pit was a sunken pit. These 3 ideas he kept in mind for his ideal theatre later in Bayreuth.
Riga was hugely important for Wagner, both as composer and as a conductor. As a conductor, he rehearsed nearly 40 operas, and he performed some of his own compositions in the main concert hall here, in the Schwarzhäuptersaal. As a composer, he composed the first 2 acts of Rienzi, and an interesting little song called Der Tannenbaum, which he later said was one of the first compositions where his own voice comes to the fore. He said he composed it in a Livonian Latvian key. It sort of sounds like this, with lots of flowing E minor sounds. And it reminds one very much of his later masterpiece, The Ring. It sounds like this, which are typically Wagnerian. You can already hear in this early song. It's the first composition of Wagner's that's really his.
In Riga begon Wagner ook aan de eerste schetsen voor Der Fliegende Holländer, maar hij leefde voortdurend boven zijn stand en moest op de vlucht voor zijn schuldeisers. Dat zou zijn hele leven zo blijven.
He managed to escape to the Baltic coast and got on a ship on a very stormy trip to Paris. This is where Wagner's career really begins, and The Flying Dutchman, his first major work.
In 1839 arriveerde Wagner in Parijs, dat op dat moment het centrum was van de operawereld. De componist vatte meteen de ambitie op om de onbetwiste ster van de Parijse opera te worden.
It's common knowledge that Wagner was very, very poor in Paris when he stayed for the first time. And potatoes, of course, is kind of money for every day because he had absolutely no possibility to eat meat. He wasn't able to earn money. He wasn't able to have his music with success providing money for him. So he spent time begging money from his friends in Germany or in France.
De succesvolste Parijse componist was de Jood Giacomo Meyerbeer. Die beloofde Wagner te helpen, maar toch werd geen enkele opera van Wagner in Parijs opgevoerd. Wagner beweerde dat het muzikale leven in Parijs werd gedomineerd door een Joodse kliek en greep dat aan als excuus voor zijn eigen falen. Om het hoofd boven water te houden was hij bovendien genoodzaakt om piano-arrangementen te schrijven voor een andere Joodse componist, Halevi.
This was slave work from the point of view of a composer who thought of himself as the great composer in the world. He was invited to breakfast with Halevi to talk about his work for the transcription. And he was there with several journalists, and at a certain point in the conversation, everybody was speaking French. Halevi, of course, is a native French speaker. Poor Wagner doesn't speak French very well, so at a certain point, Halevi turns to him in German and says something. And the French journalists who see this are quite surprised. And they say, what? We didn't know that Monsieur Halevi could speak German. And he turns to them and says, oh, didn't you know all Jews can speak German? So Wagner in this moment is suddenly, in the company of Halevi, a Jew. And I think if one looks at Wagner's subsequent turn to the anti-Semitic writings that we know, one can recognize the fear of contamination, the fear that he has been too close to what he describes as being Jewish or French or decadent or modern, and therefore the effort always to distance himself from that.
Rienzi is an attempt, as Wagner himself admitted, to outdo Meyerbeer and Halevi, who were the two leading lights on the French operatic stage at the time, and in terms of its length and bombast, it certainly achieves that aim. But it is quite remarkable that he was able to write Der Fliegende Holländer in almost the same breath as the final sketches for Rienzi, because the two do seem to be worlds apart.
Flying Dutchman is suddenly a masterpiece. A small masterpiece, but a masterpiece. And he found what he could do, and he found the themes that were going to stay with him through all the others. Love, death, redemption, and that's what his operas are all about.
Der Fliegende Holländer is het verhaal van een matroos die eeuwig over de zeeën moet rondzwerven tot hij door de liefde van een trouwhartige vrouw wordt verlost. In Parijs was Wagner geïnteresseerd geraakt in het mesmerisme en het onderbewustzijn, twee thema's die vanaf toen zouden doorklinken in zijn hele oeuvre.
In that period, there was a famous book published in Germany by someone called Enemos, all about magnetism, that describes dreaming and sleepwalking, and says that the consciousness is more awake when sleeping than it is when someone is awake. In The Flying Dutchman, when Zenta listens to a dream recounted by her fiancé Eric, and Wagner writes in the stage direction, Zenta sinks into a magnetic sleep and dreams the dream that Eric is telling her about. It's a very sophisticated psychological observation about Zenta.
In 1842 beleefde Rienzi in de opera van Dresden zijn première op aanbeveling van Meyerbeer. Het zou het grootste succes uit Wagners leven worden. Rienzi wordt niet beschouwd als een van Wagners beste werken, maar de opera maakte hem beroemd in heel Europa en leverde hem een betrekking op als kapelmeester aan het hof van de koning van Saksen.
At Dresden, he was able to spend money on establishing himself as a composer who was also an intellectual. And he began the fascinated and sometimes intensive reading of philosophers, particularly Hegel. As far as Hegel was concerned, music had come to an end with Beethoven. This gave Wagner a natural stimulus to develop a new style of music which would both oppose and also surpass anything that had gone before.
Met hun Teutoonse, mythische thematiek veranderden Tannhäuser en Lohengrin het gezicht van de Duitse opera. Tegelijkertijd verlegde Wagner de grenzen van zijn muzikale spectrum, zowel op de bühne als in het orkest.
The orchestra before Wagner was used with great brilliance and mastery by all kinds of different composers to do lots of different things. But Wagner inherits all that and fills out the gaps. He blocks and ranks his orchestra in choirs. So the range of colour is much greater, but also the range of sonority and blend.
Lohengrin brengt het Germaanse verhaal van een graalridder die verschijnt om een veroordeelde vrouw te redden. Hij trouwt met haar op voorwaarde dat ze hem nooit naar zijn naam vraagt. Maar in de huwelijksnacht is ze haar nieuwsgierigheid niet meer meester en zo veroordeelt ze hem om terug te keren naar zijn geestelijke wereld.
An amazing sound world. He does it, of course, in Lohengrin by using almost entirely violins. He has violins divided into 3 different sections, all internally divided. Some of them playing normally and others playing on harmonics. It's an amazing idea, and after a while all the violins take off together and you don't hear any cello, basses or any lower instruments at all for that opening. Striking idea.
I think with this work, for the first time, he felt that he'd reached the kind of stretching of music. There is something very seductive about this, and the entire opera has been conceived in a very cohesive way to exploit this power of music, to draw you in, and to give you the feeling that it's giving you something that you lack in your real life.
In fernem Land, unnahbar euren Schritten, liegt eine Burg, die Montsalvat genannt. Ein lichter Tempel steht dort inmitten, so kostbar, als auf Erden nichts bekannt.
He was turned on by Greek tragedy, and he saw that the subject for their dramas, which had music, was always myth. Why, Wagner argued? The reason why myth is because myth is not limited by history. Myth enshrines timeless truths. Love and hate and all those subjects, that is the stuff of drama, were for Wagner most powerfully represented in myth.
Wagner was ervan overtuigd dat hij met zulke universele thema's de wereld zou kunnen veranderen. Maar daarvoor was wel eerst een revolutie nodig. De revolutie in Dresden van 1848 moest alle Duitse staatjes verenigen tot één Duitse natie. Als vurig nationalist nam Wagner deel aan de revolte, deels ook omdat hij dacht dat de revolutie hem zou helpen om zijn radicale artistieke ideeën waar te maken.
What the Saxon government did is simply to send the troops in. So This made the revolutionaries even more angry, and it's this point that the Russian anarchist Bakunin, a wild man of 19th century European politics, began to organize violent barricades. He had Wagner going up church steeples to keep a lookout for the Prussian army on the horizon, all to no avail, of course. The Prussians came in, there were mass arrests, quite a severe repression, and the whole thing was closed down. Wagner had to flee, and the old order was restored.
Om aan een gevangenisstraf en mogelijk een executie te ontkomen, vluchtte Wagner met de hulp van Franz Liszt naar Zurich. Daar besteedde hij 4 jaar aan het schrijven van een dikke bundel theoretische essays, waarin hij zijn criteria voor een nieuw ideaal kunstwerk voorstelde. Het Gesamtkunstwerk, of totale kunstwerk. Het bestond uit een combinatie van muziek, poëzie, dans en visueel spektakel. Wagner noemde zijn nieuwe kunstvorm muzikaal drama en meende dat het de kunst uit zou tillen boven het niveau van het loutere vermaak, het niveau waarnaar het in de bourgeoismaatschappij zou zijn afgegleden. In zijn meest controversiële geschrift, Das Judentum in der Musik, diept hij dat thema verder uit en stelt hij bovendien de Joden verantwoordelijk voor alles wat in de Duitse kunst middelmatig en niet oorspronkelijk is. Het werk wierp een donkere schaduw over Wagners leven en reputatie, vooral toen het naziregime later zijn theorie zou gebruiken om zijn racistische ideologie te onderbouwen.
Firstly, the anti-Semitism is crucial to his life, his whole vision of life, his personal life, his relationships. Secondly, it's absolutely central to his revolutionary theory about the redemption of the human race, especially led by the Germans, obviously. Thirdly, it's connected up with his socialistic and other critiques of society, bourgeois capitalism, and of morals, bourgeois morals. He doesn't like, for example, to take a trivial case, the 10 Commandments. They're Jewish because they forbid adultery, and that's inconvenient for him. So, he actually says this, do away with the 10 Commandments, a Jewish plot. So it's not just something that's sort of little side dish. It's absolutely central to him, to his whole being. As he says, it's as vital to my being as gall is to the blood. He says that to Liszt.
He really, I think, became seriously anti-Semitic after the failure of his efforts in the 1848-9 revolution. Wagner thought, in his usual rather self-centered way, that a revolution in Germany would free him up to reform and revolutionize German music and German culture. And when this proved not to be the case, he had a very serious rethink in 1848. And it's that led him then to write his notorious tract on Judaism in music just a few months later. And his real concern was to try and regenerate the spirit of what he regarded as German music. And he used the music of Meyerbeer, particularly, to some extent also Mendelssohn, as a kind of symbol of everything he hated.
In Zurich begon Wagner met het componeren van zijn muzikale meesterwerk, Der Ring des Nibelungen. Het stuk duurt 15 uur en bestaat uit 4 opera's. Das Rheingold, Die Walküre, Siegfried en Götterdämmerung. Hij zou maar liefst 26 jaar nodig hebben om het werk te voltooien.
He has the idea of combining an opera libretto that's as complex psychologically and dramatically as Shakespeare, with a musical score that's as complex in terms of structure and form as Beethoven. So Shakespeare plus Beethoven equals Wagner. He has to rethink his musical style. He has to make it more symphonic. He has to rethink his way of writing libretti. He has to make them more mythical, more psychological, more universal, if you like. This is where he sees Shakespeare. So by the time he begins The Ring, he's worked out a system where this equation of Shakespeare plus Beethoven equals Wagner is at last going to succeed.
De 3 hoofdpersonages zijn Wotan, de koning van de goden, zijn dochter Brunhilde en Siegfried, haar minnaar. Alles draait om een gouden ring. Wie hem draagt en de liefde afzweert, wordt de heerser van de wereld. De thema's zijn heroïsme, hebzucht en verraad, maar ook liefde en verlossing.
It's a very violent piece. It's about human failure, murder, incest, what you want. Everything which is horrible is in there.
What defies, for ordinary people, understanding is the truth that one man could carry in him the totality of that design, could somehow construe from the first note to the last a coherent immensity of a complexity which defies analysis.
The music itself is sometimes highly dramatic because of the fact that it is declaimed. People who sing beautifully, like they would sing certain Italian arias, miss totally the expression in Wagner's music, and people who cannot sing beautifully and who only bark their way, the sort of famous Wagnerian bark, with the excuse of making the text understandable, is also only part of the truth.
I'm sure that part of the allure and the captivation of Wagner is that his music never really addressed practicalities, and in many ways it is totally impossible to perform and stage, which means that it remains an enigma. Only very recently, I think, have we begun to find Brunhildes who are credible on stage as well as able to fulfill the vocal demands.
Some composers, you have to look at a line and say, now how do I make music out of that? Wagner composes it, it's all there, whether it's from the dynamics, whether it's the shaping with the words. All you have to do is sing what's written. From the technical standpoint, they're marathon roles. You know why you're tired the next day. It's not your voice that's tired, it's your body that's tired. It's your feet, it's your knees, it's your back, it's maybe the muscles that you need, to make your support system work properly. It's physically exhausting, and that's what a lot of people don't realize.
In de ring maakt Wagner voor het eerst echt gebruik van het leidmotief. Het zou het belangrijkste structurele en stilistische element worden in zijn hele verdere oeuvre.
Well, the leitmotif begins in simply showing something, someone, somewhere, by means of musical sound. Well, for instance, the Rheingold itself, the sort of title theme of the whole ring. The first time you hear that, it's brilliantly placed as a very memorable sonorous image. You just hear the girls sing Rheingold to those two chords. It's beautifully orchestrated. Once you've heard that, you can't forget it. And so whenever that recurs throughout the next 14 or 15 hours, it will have that connotation. The whole adventure of the gold is carried by those two chords, which in turn decay and become blackened and smirched. And the sound of Rheingold in Götterdämmerung is one of the blackest sounds ever made.
De haast continue staat van ballingschap had een verwoestende invloed op het huwelijk van de Wagners en Wagner zocht zijn heil in affaires met andere vrouwen.
The most famous of Wagner's extramarital affairs was that with Mathilde Wesendonck, and it took place here. Otto Wesendonck was a wealthy German merchant. In 1851 he retired to Zurich. His wife Mathilde was only 23 at the time. They soon made the acquaintance of Wagner and were happy to assist the struggling artist. The Wesendonks were nouveau riche, and to them patronage of the arts was an important form of social acceptance. So you could say that Wagner was as important to the Wesendoncks as they were to him. They provided him with the means to compose. He provided them with the opportunity to brush with genius.
They were kind of living in a house at the bottom of the Wesendonck's garden in Zurich, being propped up by the charity of Otto Wesendonck. And he fell in love with Matilda Wesendonck in a very, very idealistic and intense kind of way. And poor Minna was, you know, the nagging wife at the bottom of the garden. Not at all surprisingly. One can't help feeling sorry for her.
Toen Wagner Mathilde Wesendonck leerde kennen, hield hij op met werken aan de Ring en begon hij een nieuwe opera te schrijven, Tristan und Isolde. Het is het verhaal over een allesverterende liefde die alleen in de dood haar volmaakte vorm vindt.
Matilda was, I think, about 15 years younger than Wagner and sophisticated and cultured in a way that the increasingly frumpish Minna wasn't. And the two of them were certainly attracted to each other, but whether the relationship was ever consummated, we shall never know. And I don't think it matters, really. I mean, it's partly that there's something slightly distasteful about sniffing the sheets in that way, but also I can't convince myself that it throws any light on Tristan by pointing out parallels between Wagner and Matilda and Otto on the one hand and Tristan and Isolde on the other.
Tristan en Isolde is onlosmakelijk verbonden met het werk van Arthur Schopenhauer. Wagner dweepte met Schopenhauers theorie dat het menselijk gedrag niet wordt overheerst door het intellect, maar door irrationele impulsen, zoals ambitie, liefde, haat en seksueel verlangen. Daardoor wordt het bestaan een kwelling, die kan worden opgeheven door onder andere de dood.
Wagner clearly at that point when he took on Tristan and Isolde, he wanted to write something that was really, really different. He thought of all the things he could do to make it more different and more striking.
The opening phrase of Tristan and Isolde ends on a chord which leaves us all up in the air, waiting for a resolution which doesn't come. Wagner gives a kind of prominence to a feeling of non-resolution, which was unique in the history of harmonic language up till that time. And in that way alone, it stands out in his work as one of the 2 or 3 major musical events of the whole of the 19th century.